Hi, Lee. Welcome to the show.
Hey, John, glad to be here. Thanks
Oh,
for inviting me.
oh, you bet. No problem. I'm happy you're here. I see that you've written, well, several books, perhaps three books or so, but we're here to discuss mainly your most recent book, The Salvation of Henry Maxwell. That sounds pretty good. Sounds
Yeah,
very
I'd love to
interesting.
talk about it. You bet.
Okay, well, before we get there, though, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What part of the country you live in, what you've done as a profession, and how you got to the point where you are now an author?
Well, I'm in Colorado, western side of the state, in a place called Grand Junction. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's the biggest city in western Colorado, and it's not in the mountains per se, like you would think of the Rocky Mountains and so forth. It's on the high desert. When you cross over the mountains, you start to get into the high desert, which gets into the Red Rock area of Utah and that. So we're right near the Utah border, about 26 miles east of it. And I've my life here has past life was as an engineer. Uh, Structural engineer in Grand Junction, and also doing work for pretty much out throughout Western Colorado, and a lot of stuff in the mountain towns, some of the ski areas like Aspen and Telluride and so forth. So I did that for, oh gosh, 26 years maybe in the Grand Junction area. And I retired several years ago. And before I retired, I started thinking maybe, I need to do something when I retire. And golf was not one of them. I mean, I do play golf with
Mm.
my friends. Basically, I hack with them. I don't really do very well. But I thought maybe I need to do something other than playing golf. So I got into this idea of maybe I could write. And I don't know where that came from. I always enjoyed the humanities in school, even though I took, in college, I took most of the engineering stuff, but I enjoyed it. And it kind of, I thought, oh, if somebody can do it, maybe I can do it. And that kind of got me going on it. And when I retired, I started doing a little bit more writing. So it gave me more time to do that.
Okay. And how did you start writing? Did you just dive right in and write a novel, or did you do short stories? How did you get to that point?
Well, I started with probably about around turn of the Y2K area. I started doing some short stories, playing with that for a while, trying to get a little bit of feel for what I was trying to do, and learning a lot as you go. And then I ended up saying, well, okay, now let's see if we can do a novel. And that was an experience. But you just can't do it by yourself. You've got to learn a lot of the little tricks and trades. And so I started going to a lot of the workshops and conventions and so forth, and learning as I went, and trying to learn the nuances of writing a novel, which is a lot different than writing a short story.
Yeah.
But you got to have some help along the way, and you just can't do it by yourself. Just sitting in a room and scribbling something out and think it's going to work. So uh, it was a learning process, and I'm still learning, like probably most writers are.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. A forever student, I call myself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's jump right into it. This is your latest novel. We'll talk briefly about your other ones, but you really want to promote this one, The Salvation of Henry Maxwell. And I see on the cover that you got some kudos there from a Douglas Preston, the New York Times best-selling co-author, it says there. That must have been quite something.
Yeah. It's like I mentioned, going to these conventions and so forth. I joined the International Thriller Writers, which is a group of writers and fans, basically. And he was one of the founders of that organization, Douglas Preston. He writes. Oh, he's been writing for years. They're very. He writes with a fellow named Lincoln Child. They're dual writers. They work together on books, but they also do some of their individual stuff. And they've written over 50 books
Hmm.
over the years. So they're pretty prolific.
Yeah.
But there's two of them, so that helps.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you've ever seen some of his work. I mean, he's got some characters that he's does series on, and they're pretty well known. So
Okay.
I got to know him at ThrillerFest, and we've kept in contact. And when I asked him if he'd take a look at this, he said, "Sure, I'm glad to do it," and he did. And that's what helps, being involved in an organization like that. You get to network with some of these fairly famous authors, and you get to meet a lot of people that are involved in the writing industry. So it's he's he was a choice of mine, and because I read a lot of his stuff, and I was happy that he came back and did a blurb for me. So,
Nice,
I enjoyed it.
nice, nice. I'm in Canada, and I spent most of my time in Toronto, which is about the busiest, most American type of city in Canada, I suppose.
Hmm.
But Canada doesn't seem to have as many options as I noticed by talking to so many American authors, workshops and opportunities like what you just mentioned. So another reason why when we emigrated as a Hungarian family to Canada as a child growing up, I always wished that we had done that to the United States because there's so many more opportunities. But let's forget about that. Let's talk about your book. Tell me all about this book.
Well, it's a story of I don't know if you see the little cover there, if you folks out there. You probably wonder about what that cover means, and I think that might give it away a little bit too much. But it's a story of an 85-year-old former Hollywood horror actor, and how he has been traumatized. His wife died years ago, like 40 some odd years ago, and has left him in this continuing grief. And he's finally figuring out that maybe he's kind of seeing her come back to him, and that kind of drives the book about his continuing grief that ends up. If you want a theme of the book, it's a 4 point theme. You've got grief ends up following, or ends up pushing revelation,
Hmm.
and he once he gets goes through that stage, he ends up transforming his mentality, and then his basically his end end game is salvation, and not in a religious sense, just in a sense of completing what he needs to complete, a deliverance type of thing.
Okay.
So that's a 4 point theme for it, and there's other characters in the book that are very important. One of them is a woman, a young lady woman lawyer who's serving as a conservator for him because he's kind of old. He can't handle his affairs and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He hates her at first. He loathes her. He wants to get rid of her because she just kind of has to work with him. And so that's a interconnection of two characters that end up at the very end of the book. You'll see how that interaction worked out. So that's just a snippet of what the book's about, and it's a gothic feel to it because he was an old time Hollywood actor. Like if you remember the old '60s movies with Vincent Price and those folks.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
I kind of modeled him after
Cool.
a Vincent Price type of character
Okay.
who's still living. That the book takes place in 2013. So I wanted to have somebody that was like 85 years old. So I had to set it at that stage of time
Yeah.
if he was being a big actor in the 60s. And that's kind of how he got started as a character, because I remember those movies way
Mm.
back when. I remember, the 60s was a tumultuous time with, uh, Cold War going on, bomb shelters. I don't know
Yeah,
about you folks in Canada.
social.
You probably had that too.
Oh, absolutely,
Uh,
and a lot of social,
Social unrest,
yeah,
protests,
and young people
uh,
growing their hair and doing all kinds of
yeah,
things. Yeah,
right. Racial injustice and all that kind of stuff.
right.
So it was a tumultuous time. But those movies, I remember going to them on Saturday afternoons, the double features they used to have
Mm,
for those old time V type movies, they used to call them.
yeah.
And that kind of stuck with me all these years. And all of a sudden I thought about that one day. And that's how I kind of developed this idea and this character. So that's kind
Okay.
of a little backstory of how that happened.
Oh, good. I was about to ask you where did you get your ideas from, but you just answered that. So it's that's a passion of yours, and you discovered it later on in life that, oh yeah, by the way, I really like that. I was going to ask you, where do you get your ideas from besides what you just described?
I just think it's a matter of daydreaming.
Okay.
Maybe I daydream too much, thinking about things, and I like history, so I like to think
Hmm.
about things that can include historical facts in a book. Uh, the first book, Irrational Fears, was an international thriller, a lot different than this third one, Salvation of Henry Maxwell. And it had a theme of water, and water is fairly important in this world, especially, potable water, that is.
Hmm.
Uh, Even though our world is three-quarters water, you can only you can only use like 1%.
Yeah.
And it's becoming very industrialized. Corporations are buying it up, buying rights to it everywhere, here and
Okay.
there. The countries are buying rights to water on the other countries. So it's a very valuable commodity. And I think I try to put in that book how important it is to protect that resource. So that was the first book. The second book was another international thriller called The Sava Steppes, and that has to do with the history of the '90s Bosnian conflict back in the '90s. If you
Hmm.
remember the Srebrenica massacre and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff that went
I
on,
do. Yeah.
yeah, and a lot of young people don't really remember that or even have even heard of it, which is a sad state of affairs in terms of education, I think.
Hmm.
So that was kind of the draw of that book, and it ties into the bad things that can happen way back when. Genocides can happen, but also in the days of now, the present time, bad things can still happen. So it ties two different events together, uh, and that's another thriller, international thriller that takes place over in the Balkan states,
Hmm.
pretty much. So,
Okay.
and then of course the third book is a little different. It's more of it's a thriller mystery, but with that gothic romantic flair.
Okay.
So hopefully
Okay.
that'll bring some people into it saying, hey, I
Sure.
like that. We'll see what happens.
When you say romantic, I mean, is there romance in it and somehow, or is just
Well,
a
it's
feeling
a
of
it's a
a
it's a
romantic area?
gothic romance. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just mentioned Henry having lost his wife 40 some odd years
Right.
earlier.
Yeah.
Now he's wanting to get back together with her because she's kind of communicating with him from the
Okay.
grave.
Oh,
So
okay.
that
All
kind
right.
of runs that.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Interesting story. I noticed it's a fairly large book. It's good. It's a pretty hefty read. Let's take a look
Well,
at it again.
it's only
Yeah.
370 pages or so forth.
Yeah.
But and it can be read pretty fast, I think.
Sure. Yeah. I know that size. I think my most recent novel is about 360 pages. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good read. Um, how are people responding to it?
It's got some very good response. We sent out arcs to uh, and people got those, and they did read the book. The comments were all very positive. So I think people really enjoyed the book. They enjoyed the idea. They enjoyed the concept. They enjoyed the ending. The ending is something that's probably not expected, but so yeah, I've had some good feedback on it.
Okay. So it's a self-contained book, beginning, middle, and end. You don't
Correct.
imagine you're going to be writing a sequel to this. If you write another book,
I
it'll
don't
be
think if it was a sequel, it would have to be maybe a prequel
okay.
more than a
Right.
sequel.
Yeah, sure. But you write self-contained books, so when you write something else, it's bound to be a completely different story. Again, a
Pretty
thriller.
much,
Yeah.
pretty much.
And you like thrillers. Yeah.
I like thrillers. In my first book, Irrational Fears, the main character is a woman mathematician, and I did write a couple of books before with her, but they didn't go anywhere. So I tried to do the thinking I could keep with one character, and uh, you know, I wouldn't mind doing a sequel. But you really, I think at this moment in time, I think I'll probably stick with the self-contained books.
Well, you're in a small company. Everybody seems to want to do trilogies, me included.
Oh, I know. Yeah,
I
that's
speak to a lot
true.
of people and they just start with a book and next thing you know, they're writing a trilogy or a series. So self-contained books, I think, may just be a little more attractive because it's over. It's like watching a film, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's true.
What kind of
And
films do you like?
um, I like I like adventure type films. I like dramas. And like I said, I used to love those old horror movies from the
Yeah,
'60s.
right.
Uh, I like a little bit of everything. I'm not so
Okay.
much into comedies. I'm not, that doesn't sway me very much,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
well. So,
Yeah. How long did it take for you to write your first draft of this book before you send it off to the editor?
well, I think this book probably took me 4 years. My first draft was probably 2 years, and then maybe a third draft, and then a fourth draft, and that's probably the fourth one is probably where it became what it is today.
Okay.
So it takes time. I have no reason to rush.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're working with a hybrid publisher?
uh, I'm working with a publisher out of New York,
Hmm.
um, a small publisher, and my first two books were more of a direct publishing with a fellow out of Los Angeles who also was my agent for a while, and we tried to sell those to some of the bigger publishers, but we didn't get any positive response. So I decided to go away from him because I wasn't getting anywhere. But
Yeah.
it was, it's just one of those. You try that, and I think as you get older, it's tough to, unless you're 40 years old,
Hmm.
uh, you're going to find it very tough to get somebody to promote you. And I think you probably understand that as well as I
Yeah.
do.
I find that odd because, as a musician, I can understand that perhaps, I've tried to get back into music, but, it's filled with young people, 30s, even 40s, but I'm 67. But as a writer, it shouldn't really matter. You're just a writer. You could be any
It
age.
shouldn't. I
Yeah.
agree with you.
Yeah.
I'll vouch for that. I think yeah, age as a writer shouldn't be too much of a problem. But it's just the way the business is, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to get them when they're young because then you can uh, massage their career for 20 years
That's
and
right.
build it up
Yeah.
and do very well with it. But yeah, it's there's hope for anybody, I guess. Just
Sure.
hang in there.
Well, it depends what you're really looking for. I mean, it's not a way to get rich, at least for
No, it's not. No,
98% of the people who write, but
not many of us are James Patterson and those folks.
that's right. So, you mentioned on the cover there's that building. What does it represent?
It's a replica of a Greek temple. If you look closely, there's a door there. So if you think about it, you might have seen buildings that look like this, and they're called mausoleums. So that kind of gives you a feel for what happens in this book. And with the film strip heading up to the steps of that mausoleum, it kind of maybe might give you an idea of Henry's journey. Put it that way.
I see cliffs in the background.
Yeah, it's overlooking the ocean.
That's a 35 millimeter full coat, is what we used to call that back in the day when I was working in film.
One of the characters is also a professor of film studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, and he's a celluloid expert. When they used to have the old celluloid films,
Yeah.
and some of them used to be made of nitrates,
Hmm.
which would you'd have to really keep them carefully preserved, or they'd just deteriorate.
Yeah.
And once they got out of that in the late '50s, I think it was, then they started going to acetates. But there's
Mm.
some film history in here about that, and that adds a lot. That adds a good uh, uh, a good section to the book in terms of the history of that and the history of Henry's what films that he was in back in the '60s. So that's a component that's added to the Gothic romantic feel to it, and the and the component of the woman, young woman attorney who's a conservatory. So there's three kind of situations happening in the book, and so it goes between all of them, but they all come together, uh, flowing together within the book. So I think people will find that interesting.
Hmm.
I hope so. And I like the history of things like that,
Yeah.
the old films and so forth.
And when was this book released?
It was released September 18th,
Of
or just recently.
2024. So just
Yeah.
recently, we're in October.
Right. A
So
little over a month.
it's hard to say at this point how sales are. It's only been out for a few weeks.
It's hard to say how they are. I mean, we've been pushing it, and we're still continuing to push it and push it and push it. But you know how the business is. You
Sure.
try to do the best you can, and some days are good, some days are bad. But it's been doing okay, I think.
Yeah.
I've already had one book signing on it, and I'm not a fan of book signings. I don't think they really add a lot, other than maybe locally. But uh, I have the publicist working with me, and that's been very helpful.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
get the name out.
Again, in the United States, I talk to mainly American authors, and so many of them actually travel around, get on planes, fly around, do book
Hmm.
signings, not just in their hometown, but they go and they really hustle. Do you do
You
any of
have to
that?
hustle it. I don't do any of that. I would like to do some of that. I did work. I did go to LA in April before this thing came out and tried to hustle it a little bit. So, but getting on the planes and doing that kind of thing, I think you have to look at the bottom line. Is that worth it?
Hmm.
So,
Well, I guess if you can afford it and you're really
if you can
passionate,
afford it, why not?
sure. I
Sure.
mean, I buy guitars. I've been buying guitars my whole life, and they can get pretty expensive. I can't even imagine how much money I've spent on them, for sure.
I'll bet you got a few Martins, don't you?
I had a Martin D28. Not anymore. I had to sell it. I was
Oh no.
being a musician sometimes, made me poor, and then you end up selling the gear that you don't want. That's another
Yeah,
story altogether.
yeah, I
But
hear
sure,
you.
I mean,
I hear you.
if you're into something, it's going to cost you money. That's all there is to
It
it.
does. It does. You can't sit back on your and just think
Yeah,
it's just going to come. You got to work for it, and
absolutely. Yeah,
there's no question about that. So,
yeah, for sure. Well, I speak to many different types of authors here. One of the types is someone who, wrote the book, self-published it, put it up on Amazon, and then scratched their head wondering what the next step is. And then I
hmm
talk to people who, put out three, four, five books a year. They just write the draft, send it off to the editor, and start working on another draft. And those are the people out actually trying to make a living at it. And I can only imagine that's difficult.
yeah, it's got to be. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. So we talked about the other two books. You've wrote three novels so far. What's your plans for the future?
Well, I'm fiddling with an idea. I've started a little bit writing it about. Uh, the first two books, like I said, were international type thrillers. They take place over in the States, and then they also end up majority of them taking place in Europe and so forth. But this book was a different direction for me, and I kind of enjoyed the direction this one took. It was more of a character driven novel over a unique plot, in my biased opinion. So the book I'm trying to write right now and trying to I've pretty much got the plot worked out. Uh, Henry was about a former horror movie actor. The book I'm working on now is about a magician who's a top Vegas magician with a residency there who falls from grace, and he has his demons to deal with throughout the book. And it's going to bring in the idea of magic in different terms. You've got stage magic, which is illusions, misdirection, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
You've also got the parapsychology end of it, what a lot of people believe in,
Yeah.
with you know ESP and that kind of stuff,
Hmm. Yeah.
and kinetic whatever,
Making things move around
doing
just with your
bending
one.
spoons and that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
And then you also got religion.
Okay.
So it's kind of
Well,
bringing all three together. And he goes through uh, a journey through those different eras. And it's for the reader to figure out what they want to believe in.
sure.
So that's kind of the theme
Yeah,
of that. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be a lot of work, but I think it's got some hope to it.
for sure. For sure. You know, some people say write what you know, and there's some truth to that. But how much do you know about magic or religion or any of those things?
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
the first two books, like in my engineering background, was came out in those pretty much. Sava Steps included a scene in a big hydraulic dam in Turkey,
Okay.
uh, and so my engineering background came out in it a little bit. And but I think it's nice to try to spread your wings
Hmm.
and try to see if you can learn something new. I enjoy the research of
Yeah.
everything. So getting away from the engineering stuff, it's been helpful, I think.
Yeah.
I used to put too much detail in the books
Okay.
because of my engineering background, and I was told many a time, cut the detail, cut the detail. Well, that cuts 15 pages out. What do you want?
Yeah.
So, but they were right.
Okay.
Let the reader decide what is really happening in some of that detail work. So,
Yeah. I know what you mean.
yeah.
One of my favorite things to do was climbing mountains in the Adirondacks, hiking.
Hmm.
Adirondack 46 or climbed all 46 mountains, some of them several times over. And I did that from age 15 to age 49. And so I guess I know a lot about hiking. And so my first fiction book involved a lot of hiking. And boy, did I ever put a lot of unnecessary detail in there about hiking and what to look
Oh
out
yeah.
for. For
Oh
sure.
yeah.
You tend to do that with what you
Yeah,
know.
you do.
Yeah.
And my over the years, that's one thing I did quite a bit of was climbing 14ers in Colorado. They call them 14ers,
Okay.
which are 14,000-foot peaks.
Okay. That's different.
Whatever that equates to in meters, probably
Well,
5,000,
I know,
6,000, something
I
like
know
that.
them by feet as well because,
Yeah, yeah, right.
yeah.
Uh, but the first book, Irrational Fears, the first chapter starts at a hike in Zion National Park. I don't know if you've ever been to Zion,
No.
but it's an incredible park, and there's a hike called Angel's Landing.
Mm,
And if you ever get on YouTube, since you're very
yeah,
familiar with that,
sure.
and look up Angel's Landing, and
I will.
it's an amazing hike. It's a very thin little trail going to the top. There's uh, chains around it. You have to have them, otherwise it's a 1,200 drop off
Wow.
on either
Ooh,
side. So it's very narrow,
wow.
and it's just a gorgeous hike. It's one of the most impressive hikes in the world. Actually, it's very,
Wow.
very, very impressive. So take a look at that. That was the first chapter of that book,
Okay.
and I had to do that hike to to have some reality to it,
Oh, I see.
and I'm
Sure.
glad I did. So
Yeah. 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 Excellent. So that's hardcore research. You're actually doing it.
yeah, that's on the job research. I think.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Now, I guess otherwise you use the internet or you go to libraries or how do you get your information that you're
The internet, obviously, libraries are getting a little passe, unfortunately.
yeah,
But the thing about the internet, I mean, you got to watch what you're getting on the
that's
internet.
right.
Obviously, you got to really be careful. But one thing about the internet is, or like Amazon Books or A Books, all those places, if you're looking for a subject, you can almost Google it in one of those like Amazon and find a book on it, and you can usually purchase used ones at a very reasonable price. So it's like going to the library, but
Hmm.
it's got a little bit of money involved. But
Sure.
that's one way of getting a lot of research done, because the libraries aren't always going to have what you're looking for.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there hasn't been a question that Google hasn't been able to answer for me. And I think one of the interesting ones, I was writing a story. It was taking place in Georgia, and it was August, and it was dusk. And this person is in a forest, and he's fallen asleep. He shouldn't have. He felt he's got something to do, and he wakes up suddenly. Oh my goodness, it's getting dark, and he wakes up to the sound of a certain bird chirping. So I asked Google, what kind of birds do we hear chirping at dusk in Georgia in August? And sure enough, there's the answer.
Yeah,
Yeah,
man.
So
how do they get that stuff on there? Who puts that on there?
I
That's what I'd
don't
like
know.
to know.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, who writes all those Wikipedia articles? I don't know. I just
Yeah, it's wild. But you're right. We have to be careful when we're
yeah, be
doing some
careful.
research. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Well, let's talk about your website.
It's www.leelindauer.com is the website. And if you go to that, you can learn about all three books. You can learn about me. You can learn about some of the praise I've received on all three books. And you can also sign up for my newsletter, which will keep you informed of any comings and goings in the future. And
Mhm.
uh, I enjoy doing the newsletter. It's not something that I put out every couple of weeks or so. It's kind of a sporadic thing, but hopefully I usually try to get one out a month. So
Okay.
you can learn a lot about the books on that. It tells you a lot.
Okay, Lee, yeah, I'm going to put you full frame, and maybe you can give us a pitch for this latest book of yours. Tell people, remind them where to be able to buy it,
Okay.
and what would be the motivation for them to order it.
You can buy this at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, and a few other outlets uh, around the country. It should be available and easy to get. And it's in either paperback or it's in ebook as well.
Okay. No hardcover?
No hardcover. I'd love to have a hardcover. Maybe one of these days we'll get a hardcover out
Yeah,
of one of the books. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Any thoughts of perhaps making it an audiobook?
I've been asked that so many times, and that's something I probably should look into. I'd have to talk to the publisher and see what their ideas are on that, but that's a possibility. And I know a lot of people, uh, they love books, but they don't want to take the time to read, and they're busy, and
Sure.
listening is more helpful to them. So that's something that's might be in the future.
Well, Lee, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm really glad that you found some good way to spend your time in writing books and entertaining people with it. I think
Well, I
it's
appreciate it, and I appreciate being on your show with being in Canada and so forth. I did a podcast a couple weeks ago with a lady in BC, so I'm kind of getting used to the Canadians coming down to take a look at what I've been doing. So it's been
for
very
sure.
very fun.
We're all one big family anyway.
There you go.
Yeah.
You got it.
All right. Lee, I'm going to let you go and wish you all the success moving forward. And you're enjoying your life, I can tell. That's really nice. And hopefully we'll get you back here next year.
I'd love to do it. I
All right.
appreciate it. Thanks, John. You
Take care.
betcha.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye bye.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, and if you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then I invite you to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment if you wish. And if you are an author, I would sure love to hear from you. Until such time, keep on writing, and remember to be kind to one another.